It's Levi Brackman here with Truth, Jewish Wisdom for today. Thank you so much for joining. Before I begin, if you like this podcast, please leave a review, like it wherever you see it, on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever that is. That helps other people also find it. Thank you so much. This is the Torah portion. Uncensored part of the podcast, and the Torah portion at hand is Genesis, the first portion of Genesis, Beraishit. This is a very well-known Torah portion, but today I'm going to talk about something which is perhaps a little bit less well-known. This is a fascinating part of the Torah portion. There's the part which everyone knows. The world was created in 6 days. God created Adam on the 6th day. We find this very interesting passage. It is chapter 1, verse 26, and it says, "Vayom Elohim nas Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmoseinu v'yirdu b'digas hayom v'oif hashamayim v'behemo v'chol haaretz v'chol haremes haremes al haaretz." God said, "Let us make human in our image and according to our likeness. They will rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the domestic animals, and all the earth, as well as all the reptiles that crawl on the earth." So God said, who he said it to, it doesn't say, but he said, let us make human in our image and in our likeness. And then it says, verse 27, Pasuk Chavzayim, V'yivra Elohim es Adam b'tzalmoi b'tzelem Elohim bar oisai zachan nekeva bar oisam. So God created human in his image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. And then it goes on to say that he blessed them and he told them to be fruitful and multiply, etc., etc. That is in chapter 1. For a little bit of context, what happened here, we have chapter 2. Now, it is well known that the Bible critics see chapter 2 in a different light. They see these two versions of the story. Let's put that aside for now, and let's try and look at the text itself. It starts off in verse 4 of chapter 2. It says, Eila todas hashemayim v'aretz. These are the chronicles of the heaven and the earth. Behi baram, when he created them. B'yom asais Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. On the day that God made heaven and earth. And then it starts talking about man. Verse 7, it says, Vayitzer Hashem Elohim es ha'adam afa min ha'adama vayipach bi'apav nishmas chayim b'hi adam nefesh chaya. God formed the human out of the dust of the earth, and he blew into his nostrils a soul of life, and the human became a living being. And then it starts talking about the different types of vegetation that existed in the Garden of Eden, which was where Adam was. And there was the tree of knowledge, and then there was the tree of life, etc. We find an interesting anomaly here, that in the first chapter, when it talks about the creation of man, it says that God created the man in his image, and he created them male and female. But in the second chapter, when it talks about the creation of man and woman, it doesn't say that he created them male and female. As we see here on verse 18, it says, it's not good for a man to be alone, therefore I'll create him this helpmate opposite him or compatible with him. And then if we look at the next verse, which is really interesting, it gives a reason why God said that it's not good for a man to be alone. It says that what happened, that Adam was giving names to all the animals and all the birds of the heaven and all the beasts of the field. And he said Adam couldn't find a helpmate. So in other words, he looked at them and he saw that all the other beasts had male and females, but he didn't have a female. So he didn't have a helpmate. And he felt bad about that. So on verse 21, it says, Vayipal Hashem Elokim tardemo ala Adam vayishan. And God cast a deep sleep upon the human, and he slept. V'yikach achas mitzal oisav vayisgoir vosar tachtenar. And then God took one of its sides and closed the flesh in its place. Vayiven Hashem Elokim es hatzelo asher lokach min Adam leisha vayivehu al Adam. And God built up the side he had taken from the human, from the man, into a woman, and he brought it to the man. Vayomer Adam, and then the man said, Vayomer Adam zois apam etzem yatzomai uvasam mipsari lezois yikra isha kemi ish lukacha zois. And then the man said, this time, this is a bone from my bones and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman, Isha. Why? Because she was taken from man, from Ish. So Isha means taken from man. Alkein, therefore, Yaziv Ishas Avis Imo V'Davak B'Ishtev Ho'Ilvas Echad. And therefore, a man should leave his mother and his father, and he should cleave to his wife, and they should be to one flesh. So, in summary, what do we have here? We have the story in the first chapter that God created humans, man and woman, he created them in his image. Second chapter, it has a slightly different story. God created man. Then he saw that it's not good for man to be alone, but it doesn't yet create woman. First, Adam gives names to the different animals, and then he sees that each animal has a female. He doesn't have a female. He felt bad about that, is the implications of the verse. God causes him to sleep, takes one of his ribs, and out of his ribs he creates woman. Here there's a woman, and Adam is very happy with the woman. So that's how females came along, according to the second chapter. So, first chapter, they were created ab initio, male and female. Second chapter, female came in afterwards. So there is an anomaly here. Understand clearly why the Bible critics see this as two authors, but be that as it may, I think this is really fascinating and interesting. Let's add one wrinkle to this summary, if we may. And that is that according to the first chapter, it seems that when God created man in his image, he was creating male and female. In other words, the image of God. In the God that he was creating him in his image, there was male and female, and that's why God created man, male and female. According to the second chapter, it seems that the image of God, which man was created in, is only male, not female. So the image of God is only male, not female. Only after it came into the practical reality of having just a human male and no female, that became problematic, so God now had to create female as well. But God's image is male, female was created as an afterthought to help male. But female is not necessarily in God's image. Female is more in the image of the male, which is in the image of God. That's what the second chapter seems to apply. Now, if you continue this fascinating verse, which is often overlooked, found in chapter 6, and it says in verse 1, it says, Vahi ki heichel ha'adam l'rei v'pnei adama uvonos yuladu lohem. And now when humanity began to multiply in the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. So now they have a lot of girls. Not just males, but also females. What happens? Verse 2, pasuk base, Vayiru v'nei ha'elehim es bnei adam ki toibes heina. And the sons of God saw the daughters of man that they were good. Ve'yikchu lahem noshim, and he took from amongst the human females, women, mikol shebachar, from whatever they choose. So the Bnei Elohim, the sons of God, came down and they took women for themselves. Interesting verse. What does this mean? So Rashi straight away says, well, this is talking about the princes and the judges. This wasn't God or the children of God himself, but rather these were Elohim as in the judges, and sometimes Elohim is referred to as judges in the Bible, and therefore that's what it's talking about. Like the people, the prominent people came and they just took whichever women they wanted, and that was totally inappropriate, but that's what they did, and that was bad. There's a midrash, which the Ramban brings down, and he says, no, this is talking about actually the angels. Angels came down, they enclosed themselves in physical form, and they came and they took girls. Now, if you look at Maimonides, the second chapter of Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, of the Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah, it says the different names which the angels are called reflect their spiritual levels. Thus they are called, and he goes through the names of the angels. And there are 9, and they are the following. Va'ofanim, Erelim, Chashmalim, Seraphim, Malachim, Elohim, Uvenei Elohim, Kruvim, Ve'ishim. Let's go through that. They are the Holy Chayot, the Ofanim, Elohim, Erelim, and Bnei Elohim, the sons of Elohim. So Bnei Elohim, those are names of angels, according to Maimonides. So in other words, it is plausible to say that when the Torah says, "Vayiru v'nei Elohim," and the sons of God saw, es b'nois Adam, the daughters of humans, ki tovosena, that they were good. It means that they saw human females and they liked them, and therefore they came down and they took whatever they wanted. This makes a lot of sense according to chapter 2, not so much sense according to chapter 1. According to chapter 1, God created man and woman in his image, which means that up above there was male and female. According to chapter 2, he created man in his image and there was only male there, no female. And if that's the case, then he had to create female. So now man has a helpmate. So now you have female, and the Bnei Elohim, the Malachim, the angels, do not have female. They come down, they look and they see, look, human females are beautiful. I want some of them. So they come down and they take human females for themselves. And that also makes a lot of sense in the context of the verses, because you see what happens next. In verse Gimel, verse 3 of chapter 6, it says, God said, my spirit will not continue to deliberate over humanity forever, since they are mere flesh. They will have 120 years. This is a really, really cryptic verse. But I interpret this verse to mean that God is saying, look, there's a problem here. That now you have angels which have cohabited with humans. The children, therefore, out of them are now godly in a sense, and much more powerful. I need to somehow put a stop on their power and make sure that they don't live more than 120 years. Interestingly, that previously, also we find God is scared of the power of humanity. For example, when in chapter 2, humans were going to eat from the tree of life, he was scared they would live forever. So he had to throw them out of the Garden of Eden. So there is a subtext to Genesis, the portion of Genesis where God is constantly trying to put tabs on the power of humans. And here, when the Bnei Elohim come down, the children of God, the angels called Bnei Elohim, come down and cohabit and take women, and then they have children. These are very powerful children, and God wants to put limits on the power of these children. Then it continues and it says, the fallen ones were on the earth in these days. Who were the fallen ones? Well, according to this narrative, the fallen ones were the Bnei Elohim, the children of God, who had fallen down into this world to take the women, the human women. And what that verse means, verse 4, it means that for these Bnei Elohim, the children of God, continued to have relations with these women, and then therefore they had children, and therefore the children were mighty, and they also were men of name. In other words, they were very powerful men. And so now you had humans with tremendous power going on. And then for God saw that man's wickedness on earth, and that every impulse of his thoughts of his hearts were evil all day long. And God then regretted that he had created man, and then he brought upon them the flood, or decided he was going to bring upon them the flood, and he was going to destroy man. What you find really fascinating, though, is that some of these very powerful people, one of them, his name was Oy, was called a polit. A polit means a refugee from the flood. He was able to protect himself, so he didn't actually get killed in the flood, and he continued living. And later on, much later on, in the Torah, we have the story of the spies, and the spies find the Bnei Anak, the very, very tall and powerful people. We also find the Mapilim there, the fallen ones there. These are people who were very, very powerful, lived in the land of Israel, and that's what the Israelites feared of when they were spying out the land. And God said not to fear them, and in a sense, their role of the Jewish people was to destroy the remnants of these people who were born from the cohabitation of the Bnei Elohim, the sons of God, with the daughters of humankind, because that brought upon a certain evil into this world, which had to be destroyed. God wasn't able to totally destroy them with the flood. In the end, the Jewish people destroyed them when they entered the land of Israel and conquered the land of Israel. And that is some of the narrative which is going on here. Often not spoken about at all in this way. It's kind of a footnote in the Ramban. Most of the tradition wants to read this verse entirely differently than this for obvious reasons, but I thought that I would share this reading here. I think it's fascinating. It seems to me that this is actually the simple meaning of the verses. It makes much more sense to interpret the verses in this way. I understand the theological problems with it. However, I want to be able to, this is a Torah portion uncensored, and I want to be able to show how this actually fits in very well with not just the narrative here, but also the narrative later on where it talks about the spies and how the Torah seems to think that they had this problem of the Bnei Elohim coming down, consorting with human women, causing this problem, which brought about the flood, which ended up much later because you had the polit, you had the refugee from the flood, which was Oig, who continued living and continued having children. That also had to be destroyed eventually, and that was part of the role of the Jewish people when they entered the land of Israel, to destroy those people. And that was something that they really didn't want to do when they saw how powerful these people were. In a sense, they were going to have to fight with the descendants of the sons of God. They were scared to do that, and that was their big sin, perhaps, of the spies, but that's for a different day. Meanwhile, I wanted to share all this. I hope this has been interesting. This has been Levi Brackman with Truth, Jewish Wisdom for the Day, Torah portion uncensored. Thank you so much for joining, and until next time.